The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers so bright they almost hurt my eyes. Crystal glasses clinked, and servers floated between tables carrying trays of champagne and delicate appetizers I couldn't pronounce. Everyone looked so polished. Women in gowns that fit like second skin, men in tailored suits with cufflinks that probably cost more than my monthly rent back when I first met Colton. I tugged at the hem of my dress, suddenly aware it wasn't designer, and forced a smile when people brushed past me with polite nod. Colton was in his element, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, his arm brushing against my back only when someone happened to be watching. His co-workers adored him, his bosses praised him, and his mother, well, his mother hovered nearby, beaming like she had raised the perfect son who could do no wrong. I stayed quiet at our table, watching everyone toast to Colton's promotion. The champagne burned my throat as I swallowed. I told myself I should be proud, but the nagging feeling in my stomach wouldn't let go. Something was off, and I couldn't explain why. Then came the moment. Colton's mother stood, raising her glass higher than everyone else. She turned to him, her voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter. "To my son," she said, "and to Savannah, his future wife." Laughter rippled across the room. Some chuckled nervously, others raised eyebrows, but no one spoke. I felt my face flush hot, my hand tightening around the glass until it almost slipped from my fingers. My heart hammered in my chest so hard I thought the whole room could hear it. Savannah, the intern, sat across from me, her smile sweet but edged with something I couldn't name. She lowered her eyes like a shy schoolgirl, but the pink in her cheeks looked more like satisfaction than embarrassment. Colton coughed, pretending to laugh it off, and gave me the briefest glance before looking away. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. The voices around me blurred into a low hum, like bees swarming in my ear. In that moment, the expensive flowers on the tables, the sparkling wine, the polite applause, it all turned to static. I had wondered before if I was imagining things. The late nights, the excuses, the way his phone was always face down on the counter. I told myself I was being paranoid, that stress was making me suspicious. But his mother's words, bold and careless, told me everything I needed to know. I set my glass down carefully, afraid it would shatter if I held it any longer. My hands were trembling, but my face stayed calm. I forced myself to breathe, to sit still, to look like nothing was wrong. But inside, something in me cracked open. That was the moment I realized I wasn't paranoid. My gut was right all along. Colton and I had been married for 3 years. In the beginning, he was everything I thought I wanted. He opened doors for me, brought flowers for no reason, and spoke about our future with such excitement that I believed every word. He was ambitious, yes, but he made me feel like I was the most important part of his world. I used to fall asleep smiling, certain I had found the right man. Somewhere along the way, that man started to disappear. It didn't happen overnight. It was little things at first. His texts grew shorter, his eyes drifted to his phone even during dinner, and he stopped asking me about my day. Then came the late nights. At first, it was once or twice a week, which I accepted. He was climbing the ladder at work, and I wanted to be supportive. But soon, working late became his permanent excuse. I'd sit alone at our kitchen table, reheating meals I had cooked hours earlier, telling myself this was just temporary. His mother, Marjorie, never helped. From the very first time I met her, I knew she had made up her mind about me. She smiled at me the way people smile at strangers they don't plan to see again. Her compliments always came with sharp edges. "Pretty dress," she'd say, though maybe not what I'd expect for someone in Colton's circle. She reminded me again and again that her son was destined for great things and that he needed someone who could match his pace. I learned to swallow my irritation, but each comment left a small cut that never fully healed. Then Savannah entered our lives. She was introduced as Colton's intern, a bright-eyed young woman with perfect posture and a soft laugh that carried across a room. On the surface, she looked harmless, sweet, eager to please, respectful. But there was something in the way she held herself, like she already belonged, as if she knew she had a role larger than just fetching coffee or taking notes. I noticed the way Colton lit up when she was around. He'd lean in close when speaking to her, their shoulders brushing, their voices lowered like they were sharing private jokes. Once, I walked into his office to bring him lunch, and they stopped talking mid-sentence, the air between them thick with something unspoken. He brushed it off, saying they were just discussing a project, but the look on Savannah's face said otherwise. There were other small signs, things I tried to push out of my mind. A whisper between them that ended with her hand covering her mouth in a laugh too soft for me to hear. The way Colton once smelled faintly of her perfume, even though he swore he hadn't seen her outside the office. The times he left early in the morning without telling me where he was going, only to return hours later with vague explanations. Each moment on its own seemed too small to fight about, too easy for him to deny. But together, they built a pattern I could no longer ignore. I told myself I was overthinking, that marriage takes work, that he was just stressed. Still, deep down, I knew those cracks weren't random. They were leading to something much larger, something I wasn't ready to face. As soon as the party ended, I could feel the tension burning in my chest. I kept smiling for appearances, shaking hands, thanking people for coming, but inside I was boiling. The moment we stepped into the car, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to Colton and asked him directly, "What did your mother mean when she called Savannah your future wife?" He didn't even look at me at first. He started the car, adjusting his tie like nothing had happened. "It was a joke," he said flatly, almost bored. "You're blowing it out of proportion." "A joke," I repeated, my voice sharper than I meant. She said it in front of everyone. Everyone looked at me. "Colton, do you understand how humiliating that?" Finally, he looked at me, but instead of the understanding I hoped for, his eyes were cold. "You're overreacting. My mom has a weird sense of humor. You always take things too seriously." The words stung, but what hurt more was the way he said them, dismissing me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. I tried again, softer this time, hoping he'd hear me. "It didn't sound like a joke. And Savannah, did you see the way she smiled when your mom said it?" That was when his tone shifted from cold to sharp. "Are you really doing this? Are you seriously jealous of my intern? You sound insecure, and honestly, it's exhausting." My stomach dropped. Instead of calming me down, he had flipped it back on me. I sat in silence for the rest of the ride, staring out the window, biting the inside of my cheek, so I wouldn't cry in front of him. Later that night, I walked into the kitchen to grab water, and there she was, Savannah. She had stayed behind with a few others to help clean up, or at least that's what she said. She glanced at me and then at Colton, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't friendly. It was small, sly, the kind of smile you give when you know something the other person does. I froze in the doorway, and she tilted her head slightly as if to say, "Yes, I know what's going on, and you can't stop it." Colton didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. He was too busy pouring himself another drink, pretending nothing was wrong. That smile haunted me for the rest of the night. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was seeing what I feared most. But then I remembered the way Marjorie smirked during her toast, the satisfaction in her eyes when she said future wife. That wasn't a joke. That was intentional. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to Colton's steady breathing as he drifted off easily beside me. My mind, however, wouldn't rest. Maybe I was insecure, maybe I was overthinking, but deep down I knew I wasn't wrong. Two women had shown me exactly what they wanted, and the man beside me was pretending not to see it. In the days after the party, I couldn't stop thinking about Marjorie. Her words, her smirk, the way she looked at Savannah, it all felt too deliberate. I started paying closer attention, watching her carefully instead of brushing things off the way I used to. It didn't take long to see the truth. Marjorie spoke about Savannah as though she were already part of the family. She invited her along to lunches, included her in conversations I was left out of, and praised her constantly. If Savannah walked into a room, Marjorie's whole face lit up. If I walked in, it was as if the air grew heavier. I was the wife, yet I felt like an unwanted guest in my own marriage. One afternoon, I overheard them in the kitchen while I was setting the table. Marjorie's voice carried with a kind of warmth I had never once received from her. "Savannah, dear, you're such a breath of fresh air. You remind me of myself when I was younger. Colton needs someone like you by his side." My heart pounded, but I stayed quiet, pressing my hand against the counter to steady myself. Savannah laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to sound modest but filled with pride. They didn't even notice me standing just a few feet away, invisible in my own house. That night, I lay awake replaying a memory I had tried to bury. It was after Colton and I had gotten engaged. Marjorie had taken me aside, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her smile sharp. "You're a sweet girl," she said, "but Colton is destined for big things. He needs someone who can help him climb higher. I hope you're prepared for that, though honestly, I'm not sure you're the type." At the time, I laughed it off, convincing myself she was just being protective. But now, hearing the way she spoke to Savannah, I realized it hadn't been a casual remark. It had been a warning. She never believed I was enough for her son. The pieces began to fall into place. Savannah wasn't just some intern who happened to get close to Colton. She had been placed there. Marjorie had found her, chosen her, and slipped her neatly into Colton's world. The idea made my stomach twist. This wasn't an accident, it was a plan. I thought back to how quickly Savannah had risen in Colton's office. Most interns faded into the background, but not her. She always seemed to be in the spotlight, always right where she needed to be. And Marjorie, with her connections and her influence, had cleared the path for her. The realization was sickening. I wasn't just battling a husband who had grown distant or a young woman who smiled too sweetly. I was up against his mother, who had been pulling strings from the very beginning. And in that moment, I understood something I had never dared to admit before. This wasn't random, and it wasn't just bad luck. It was a scheme, and I was the target meant to be pushed aside. I hadn't planned on hearing them that day. I had gone upstairs to grab a book I'd left in the study, but as I passed the half-open door to the sitting room, I froze. Marjorie's voice floated out, low but clear. "You just have to be patient, Savannah," she said, her tone calm and careful, like a teacher guiding a student. "Colton deserves a wife who can stand beside a CEO. He can't afford to be dragged down. You're exactly what he needs." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there gripping the doorframe, my nails digging into the wood. Savannah's answer was softer, but I heard the smile in it. "I understand. I don't want to rush him. He'll come around." Marjorie's reply cut straight through me. "Of course he will. Men need a little push sometimes, but trust me, he'll see it soon enough." I stepped back before they could notice me, my legs shaky as if the ground itself had shifted. It was no longer suspicion or guesswork. They weren't hiding it. They were planning my replacement, as if I were a temporary placeholder in my own marriage. I slipped into the hallway, my chest tight, and held myself against the wall until their voices faded. My heart felt heavy, heavier than it ever had before. I wanted to scream, to storm in there and throw every word back at them. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I did, they'd only twist it, make me look unstable, maybe even laugh in my face. That night, Colton came home late again. I was sitting in the kitchen, the clock ticking past midnight, when I heard his car pull in. He walked through the door with his tie loose, his shirt wrinkled, and something about him felt different. When he leaned down to kiss my cheek, the faint scent clung to him. It wasn't mine. It was floral, light, and sickeningly sweet, the same perfume Savannah always wore. I pulled back slightly, my stomach churning. "Long night?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Meetings," he said quickly, pouring himself a glass of water and avoiding my eyes. "Don't start. Don't start." That was all I got after hours of waiting. He didn't even notice the way my hands were trembling as I set my glass down. I studied him in that moment, the curve of his mouth, the way he wouldn't look at me, and I knew. He wasn't just working late. He wasn't just tired. He was already slipping away from me, and the worst part was that he didn't even try to hide it anymore. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, while his breathing grew deep and steady. My heartache hardened into something else, a sharp determination. They wanted me gone, but I wasn't going to be pushed out quietly. I would need proof, undeniable and clear. If they were going to treat me like I was blind, then I would open my eyes wider than ever. And when I had the truth in my hands, I would decide what to do with it. I began paying attention to every detail, no matter how small. If Colton thought I wasn't watching, he was wrong. I checked his pockets when he tossed his suits over the chair, looked through his briefcase when he left it by the door, and kept an eye on the bank statements he often left lying around. One afternoon, I found the first crack of truth. Buried between work expenses and dinner charges were receipts for hotel stays. They weren't for business trips. He hadn't mentioned any travel, and the hotels were right in the city. The dates matched nights he claimed he was working. My hands shook as I held the paper, reading his signature scrawled at the bottom of each bill. I slipped the receipts back where I found them and forced myself to act normal, though my chest burned with anger. But that wasn't enough. I needed more than slips of paper. A few days later, I borrowed his car to run errands. When I opened the passenger side door, something caught the light. It was a delicate silver chain, tucked between the seat and the console. I picked it up carefully, and my heart sank. I had seen it before. Savannah wore it often, a necklace with a tiny charm shaped like a crescent moon. It didn't belong to me, and it definitely didn't belong to Colton. I held it in my palm for a long time, the metal warm against my skin, before sliding it back into its hiding spot. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then, but I stopped myself. If I went to him with just this, he'd find a way to explain it away. He always did. The final blow came one night when he thought I was asleep. I lay still in bed, my back to him, as he slipped quietly into the hallway with his phone. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but the house was silent, and every word reached me. "I'll fix everything soon," he said. His tone was tender in a way it hadn't been with me in months. "I promise." I didn't need to hear the name. I already knew who was on the other end of the line. The softness in his voice told me more than words ever could. I pressed my face into the pillow, my chest tightening until it hurt. But this time, no tears came. The heartbreak I had been carrying for weeks turned into something sharper. Anger, fury, a heat that rose from deep inside and refused to be ignored. He wasn't just lying to me. He was building a future with someone else while expecting me to play the loyal wife in the background. Marjorie, Savannah, Colton, they all thought I'd stay silent, that I'd walk away quietly when the time came. But they were wrong. If they wanted to treat me like a fool, I would show them just how much of a fool I wasn't. I wasn't going to leave quietly. If they were going to betray me, I was going to make sure the whole world saw exactly who they really were. Once I had the truth, I knew I couldn't waste it. Confronting Colton alone would do nothing. He would twist my words, deny everything, and Marjorie would stand right behind him, smiling while I fell apart. No, if I was going to fight back, I needed to do it on my terms. The first thing I thought about was Marjorie. She lived for appearances. Every event, every gathering, every dinner she hosted was a chance to show the world how perfect her family was. Her entire reputation depended on the image of Colton as the golden son and our marriage as polished and strong. If I could shatter that image in front of the right people, the damage would be permanent. I started planning carefully. I smiled more at Colton, asked about his work, pretended to be supportive. He relaxed, believing I had stopped asking questions. That gave me time to work quietly. I collected the hotel receipts, the necklace, and even recorded a snippet of his late-night phone call. Each piece of evidence was small on its own, but together they built a picture no one could deny. Then I suggested the idea of a dinner. You deserve to celebrate your promotion properly, I told him one evening, my voice light. Why don't we have a private dinner with your closest colleagues and the family? Something intimate. His face lit up at the thought, and he agreed without hesitation. Of course he would. He loved being the center of attention, and Marjorie adored nothing more than parading him in front of the people who mattered. Over the next week, I made arrangements. I booked a private dining room at one of his favorite restaurants, the kind of place with velvet curtains and white-gloved servers. I sent out invitations to his colleagues, a few higher-ups from his firm, and naturally Marjorie and Savannah. On paper, it looked like the perfect celebration. Behind the scenes, it was my stage. I spent hours putting together what I needed. I created a slideshow that looked like a tribute to Colton's success, filled with professional photos and work highlights. Hidden within it were the receipts, a photo of the necklace in his car, and the transcript of his whispered promise. Each slide timed to appear seamlessly, giving me the chance to expose him without warning. As I rehearsed the plan in my head, I felt calmer than I expected. I wasn't trembling anymore or crying in secret. Instead, I was steady, clear. For once, I wasn't the one being controlled. I was the one pulling the strings. Every detail was ready, the guest list, the evidence, the setting. All that remained was waiting for the night to arrive. I knew it would be brutal, humiliating, unforgettable. But that was exactly what I wanted. If they had conspired to erase me, then I would erase the perfect picture they had tried to build. And when the curtain finally fell, none of them would see it coming. The night of the dinner arrived, and I walked into the restaurant with a calm smile on my face. The private dining room was glowing with soft golden light, the long table covered in crystal glasses and polished silverware. Colton looked proud, shaking hands with his colleagues as though the night belonged only to him. Marjorie was already at her seat, her pearls shining, her eyes sharp as ever. Savannah sat beside her, dressed elegantly, her hair tucked neatly behind her ear like she wanted to look professional, but still irresistible. The evening started smoothly. The servers brought out wine, and everyone toasted to Colton's promotion. Laughter and polite conversation filled the air. I kept my smile fixed, nodding along, appearing every bit the proud and supportive wife. No one could see the storm that was waiting beneath my calm expression. As the main course was being served, Marjorie leaned forward, her voice carrying just enough to be heard across the table. Colton has always needed someone who can understand his world, she said sweetly. Her gaze slid toward Savannah before returning to the group. Savannah has such a natural way of fitting in. It's refreshing. There was a ripple of agreement from a few people at the table. Savannah lowered her eyes like she was shy, but her lips twitched upward, betraying her pleasure. Colton chuckled, brushing it off, but his glance toward Savannah was enough to make my chest tighten. I laughed lightly with the others, masking the heat that rose in me. Yes, I said smoothly. Savannah certainly does have a way about her. My tone carried no edge, no bitterness. It was important they all believed I was simply joining the joke. The dinner carried on, and soon it was time for my part. I stood, tapping my glass gently. I've prepared something special for tonight, I announced, my smile warm. A little surprised to honor Colton's success. The servers dimmed the lights, and the projector flickered on. At first, the screen showed professional photos, Colton at work, his awards, images of his team. People clapped politely, murmuring their admiration. Then the next slide appeared, a receipt from a downtown hotel, signed by Colton. The room went silent. Another slide, a photo of the silver necklace resting on the seat of his car. Murmurs rose around the table. Then came the transcript, the words clear across the screen. I'll fix everything soon. I promise. Gasps filled the room. Chairs creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. Colton's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Savannah's eyes widened, and she pushed back from the table, ready to bolt. Marjorie stood abruptly, her voice sharp. That's enough. Turn it off. She moved as if to block the screen, but the images were already burned into everyone's eyes. Whispers circled the room like wildfire, colleagues exchanging shocked looks. I stood still, hands folded neatly in front of me, my expression calm. Marjorie's hand trembled as she tried to regain control, but it was too late. The truth was out, raw and undeniable, and no amount of her influence could cover it now. Colton stood up so quickly his chair almost tipped. His face was pale, sweat gathering at his temples as he leaned toward me. "Please," he whispered urgently, "let's step outside. We need to talk. Just you and me." I kept my hands folded in front of me and met his eyes without flinching. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "There's nothing left to talk about." The words seemed to knock the breath out of him. His mouth opened, then closed again like he couldn't find a script to follow. For once, the man who always had an answer stood speechless. Savannah shifted in her seat, her cheeks burning red. Her fingers fumbled with her purse strap, and she avoided the stares from every side of the table. A nervous laugh escaped her lips, but no one joined in. She pushed her chair back with a sharp scrape against the floor and stood. I should go," she muttered, and without another word she stormed out, her heels striking fast and uneven. The door slammed behind her, and the room filled with hushed whispers. Marjorie reacted instantly, her face twisted with anger. She slammed her hand against the table, rattling the silverware. "This is disgusting," she snapped, her voice cutting through the whispers. "You've embarrassed my son in front of his colleagues, humiliated this family. And for what? Because you're jealous of a young woman who has a future." Her words dripped with venom, but they didn't have the effect she wanted. I saw the looks on the faces around us, tight lips, averted eyes, people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They weren't judging me. They were judging her. For the first time, her mask had slipped in front of the very people she wanted to impress. I let her words hang in the air before answering, calm and even. "No, Marjorie, I didn't embarrass your family. You did. I only showed the truth." Colton reached toward me again, his voice breaking. "Please don't do this here. We can work it out. Just give me a chance to explain." I stepped back, my chair pushed neatly under the table. My purse hung from my shoulder, and I stood tall. "There's no working this out, Colton. This marriage is over. Consider this my resignation from your family." The room went completely silent. I saw the shock ripple across his face, the disbelief, the sudden panic. Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands trembling as she gripped her glass. Without waiting for anyone to speak, I turned toward the door. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step firm and final. Behind me, voices rose, Colton pleading, Marjorie hissing, colleagues whispering. But I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I walked out with my dignity intact, leaving them to pick up the broken pieces of their perfect image. The days after the dinner felt strangely quiet. For the first time in months, I woke up without the weight of pretending, without the endless guessing and second-guessing. I called a lawyer the very next morning, and within a week, the divorce papers were filed. I didn't cry as I signed them. My hand was steady, and my heart felt lighter than it had in years. Word of the dinner spread faster than I expected. Colton's colleagues were polite enough not to say anything directly to him, but whispers followed him everywhere. The slideshow had been too clear, too undeniable. His reputation, once spotless, now carried a stain he couldn't wash away. I heard from a friend that clients were asking questions, that his bosses no longer looked at him the same. The golden image he and Marjorie had worked so hard to polish was cracked wide open. As for Savannah, she vanished almost overnight. She didn't get the position she thought she was promised. She stopped showing up at the office, and no one spoke her name aloud anymore. Whatever dreams she had of sliding into my place had ended the moment the truth lit up that dining room. Marjorie tried to hold on, of course. She stormed through those first days, making calls, trying to smooth things over, trying to paint me as the villain. But the people who mattered had seen her mask slip. They had heard her venom, seen her desperation, and no one was fooled anymore. Slowly, her voice lost its power. Invitations stopped coming. Her influence dimmed. I moved through those weeks with a calm I hadn't known in years. I packed my things, closed the door on that house, and stepped into a space of my own. For the first time, the silence was peaceful, not lonely. There was no perfume clinging to my husband's shirt, no forced smile over cold dinners, no shadow of Marjorie hovering above me. Looking back, I realized I had lost a marriage, but not a partner, because he had stopped being one long before the papers were signed. What I gained was far greater. I walked away with my dignity, my truth, and my freedom. I thought again about that night at the party when Marjorie raised her glass and called Savannah Colton's future wife. She had smiled then, thinking she had already won, that I was nothing more than a placeholder to be brushed aside. But she was wrong. They wanted to replace me with his future wife. Instead, I replaced them with my future, one they'll never touch. Walking away isn't easy, but sometimes it's the only way to save yourself. Do you think Colton's wife was right to expose everything and leave, or should she have tried to forgive him? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to know. And stay tuned for more stories like this.